This is the Lebenthal Report with industry veterans Michael Hartzman and Dominick Tavella. We'll break down the news, trends, and overall direction of the markets, telling you what may be coming next, investment opportunities, and what to avoid. Now, here are your hosts, Dominick Tavella and Michael Hartzman.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023, and I'm on, as always, with my partner, Dominick Tavella, both of us coming live today from beautiful, sunny, and warm Long Island, Indian summer.
We'll say a pleasant change of pace from the prior week when we had torrential rainstorms and some flooding. But as you said, a beautiful fall day in New York.
Yeah, really, really is. And we both worked all day. Neither one of us, managed to go out and play hooky or hop on a boat or go play golf. We were both working.
Usually the normal course, Mike, but once in a while we can try to sneak away once in a while.
Yeah, well, there's too much going on to sneak away now, Dom. I was trying to put a word on all the activity and volatility and uncertainty, and the best word I could think of is kind of all these cross currents that are coming at investors and are coming at markets. And I think right now, Dom, it's risk off. Everyone's focused on the juicy yield in the treasury market, and no one wants to get, has the patience to wait for things to calm down, it appears.
And it's amazing, Mike, because we've talked a lot about headline risk and the mood of the market. Literally almost 2 months ago to the day, the markets were downright giddy, right? Everything's wonderful, and we're going to talk about a soft landing, and inflation's coming down, and interest rates are going to be lower. And here we are 2 months later, and it's that doom and gloom scenario. And as you said, the markets definitively now are risk off. They're looking at this picture going forward and not very happy with it.
Dom, I think you're being kind. I don't think it was 2 months ago. You're right, but I was hearing
end of July was the market high for the year.
Yes, but 2 weeks ago we were hearing soft landing. The Fed is done, and then I don't. Jerome Powell says one or two things, and some data points come out, and I know we sound like broken records, but the economy has stayed stubbornly strong. The job market has stayed stubbornly strong. We were on a call this morning with some really smart people from JP Morgan, and they brought up the job market, and the question was asked, are we really going to wait for the job market to break? Because it may not. And that's the thing that makes me nervous.
And Mike, I'm stealing your thunder a little bit because you always bring this up. Good news is bad news, and bad news is good news. So you're exactly right. The job market has stayed very healthy. Economic growth has been relatively positive. And so the argument here is that the Fed, and Powell hinted at this, is that they're going to keep interest rates higher for longer. And we've watched now the 10-year Treasury, which not too long ago was sitting at about 4.3%, today 4.8%, Mike, and that's just scaring the markets. That just means higher mortgage rates and higher business loans and higher car loans, and all that is very negative for the economy.
And those higher rates now give clients an alternative. And this is the difference between a year ago, Dominick, and you know this obviously. A year ago, the market was down 20, the NASDAQ was down 30, but where were you going to go, right? I mean, treasuries were paying a fraction of what they're paying now. Now, a client or an institution or an endowment could say, I'll just go sit on the sidelines for 6 months or a year and get paid 5%, not have this aggravation. So the market, let me be clear, the market's not nearly as bad, remotely as bad as it was last year. As a matter of fact, the market's up for the year. But at the moment, people are looking at the last 2 months and saying, I may just sit this out for a while and just stay on the sidelines and not have to worry about it.
And we get those kind of calls all the time, right, Mike? The
Yes.
problem is that assumes you can time oh, this is a good time to get out of the market, or this is not a good time to enter into the market. And then vice versa later on, if you end up buying a 3 or 6 or 12-month treasury, hey, now's a good time to buy into the market, or not a good time to buy in the market, right? It's very difficult to time these things, as we well know, right, Mike? It's very, very difficult to time not only equity stock prices, but perhaps even more difficult to time bond prices and interest rates. So we're certainly big fans of it. Needs to be part of a larger portfolio. Some money should be in treasury, some money should be in fixed income. But this idea that I'll just sit on the sidelines and wait, usually that doesn't have a happy ending.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Usually.
And it's incumbent upon us to either, know or coax people back into the market when it is appropriate. But at this point, I think the other problem is, you mentioned the bond market. If we look at the muni bond market, I was on a call today with the muni bond manager, and he pointed out at the moment the muni bond market's down about 1.5%. And if the municipal bond market closes down this year, it'll be the first time ever that the municipal bond market had 2 negative years in a row. So I think that also adds to the uncertainty where investors right now, are just confused whether they stay patient or just, head for the hills, which I think is why we're seeing volatility across the board.
Exactly right, Mike. So we look at last year, and typically in our portfolios, we'll swing back and forth between risk on, owning equities, fixed income, owning bonds. Last year, there was no place to hide, as we love to say, right? You got equally as pummeled owning a bond as you did owning a stock. This year, not much better, as you just brought up. Very boring, very conservative municipal bonds, corporate bonds. Because of the interest rate rise, the value of these bonds has decreased. A 20-year Treasury bill, U.S. government guaranteed bond, if you would have bought it on January 1st of this year, you would have 15% less value in your portfolio. Now it's going to mature, you'll get your money back, life is good. But in the meantime, you're looking at an account statement that's down 10-15%. So there are a lot of risks out there, right, Mike? And those easy solutions, our job to allocate capital where we can get the most bang for our buck.
Right. And just to be clear, that's a 20-year treasury.
That was a 20-year.
Yeah, that would be down, significantly. But like you
I
said,
think the 10 years somewhere around 10, closer to 10%, Mike. But again, these are government guaranteed bonds, but it's the value if you went to sell it. Same as your muni example. Nothing wrong with owning those muni bonds. There's been no significant default in tax-free municipal bonds. They're a great place to store some of your capital. But if you went to sell those bonds early, prior to maturity, you would get less today than you paid for them on January 1st.
And just to remind our listeners and viewers, the bank failures happened this year, right? That seems like 25 years ago, but those bank failures happened this year, exactly, Dominic, for what you just described. They were holding on to this long-term paper and really got caught with their proverbial, what down.
Yeah, and we've covered it and spent a lot of time on that. It was really about risk controls. That's the good news. The bad news is that the higher interest rates go, the more of these problem child get exposed. So that's also part of the concern in the markets right now, is saying, hey, wait a minute, the banks or the financial institutions were able to deal with this risk when interest rates were lower. But if I'm a business and I have to refinance my debt, I was paying 3, now I'm paying 7, that's risk on, right? And the market's just adjusting to risk. The markets are doing what markets are supposed to do.
Right. And, it's like the weather. Stick around. Next week, we may be having an entirely different conversation.
And it will change, and hopefully for the better. But we are in a period of normally very volatile times. I think that continues probably for the next couple of weeks. And then hopefully we get a positive year end, as we traditionally do.
Yes. Well, we could only hope so.
We can only hope for it, Mike.
So and prepare our clients. So on tonight's show, Dom, we have a two authors, married couple, Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer, who wrote a book, Disneyland on the Mountain. And I've read a lot of Walt Disney's history. I think he's a brilliant guy, a brilliant visionary. Had no idea that in the late 60s, early 70s, he was trying to build a ski resort in the mountains of California. Did you?
No, I had no idea. We've obviously been tied into the company and what it does and its expansion around the world. So I want to see how that all ties into their other plans that are a little bit more public. But this is a really interesting story.
It is. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back with Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer, author of Disneyland on the Mountain, and learn what Walt was up to about 50 years ago. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner, Dominick Tavella, and our guest this evening, Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer, the authors of Disneyland on the Mountain. The full title is Disneyland on the Mountain, Walt, the Environmentalists, and the Ski Resort That Never Was. Wow, well, that's a great title, guys.
And now we're out of time, right?
So welcome.
No, welcome. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We're excited to talk with you both.
Thank you. So, I've read a couple of books about Walt Disney over the years and fascinated by his life. And, I don't ever recall reading about this project, which was, it was secret at one point, but pretty out in the open in the for a large part of it. There's a picture with him and the governor talking about it at the time. So how did you guys get wind of the story? And, no pun intended, let's start at 50,000 feet in the air. What was, the impetus for you writing this book?
Sure. It was, I grew up, especially going to the Disney parks when I was a kid. So I always liked Disney. I was always interested, especially in the history and the company history. Obviously, there's lots to talk about with that. But we had gone to the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco a few years back. And there's a giant timeline of Walt Disney's life. And we just happened at the right time to see that there was this very brief mention, a couple sentences saying that at one point in the 1960s, Walt Disney had tried to build a ski resort. And we thought, that's really interesting. And it kind of reminded me, I thought I had heard about that, just Disney lore a little bit, but hadn't really thought too much of it. And it had mentioned a famous Coloradan as well. We're out of the Denver area. And so we just, as his partner, as Walt Disney's partners on the project, he was a famous skier. And so that kind of got us interested as well. And we basically obsessively started to research this. We're journalists, so we tend to be curious people, and realized that there was this massive story of this resort and the fact that it was never built. There was this big environmental battle, political implications. It went to the Supreme Court, and we had realized that no one had really told the full story. And we thought, hey, let's try to do it.
So, Greg and Kathryn, we look at the picture today, and clearly Disney is a global company, right? Who would have ever thought of a Disney in Paris or China, right? And they do cruise ships. But was this part of Walt's bigger vision of where he wanted to grow the Disney brand? Was it part of early stages of global expansion? How did he come up with this idea that just, hey, I want to put a Disney World or place or resort on top of a mountain?
Yeah, great question. At the time, this all really started only about 5 years after Disneyland had opened. So, the future was kind of wide open at that point. They hadn't really defined what their sort of experiential live entertainment stuff was going to be beyond that one park. And Walt was a big skier. He actually served as the director of pageantry at the Winter Olympics in 1960 in California. And that gave him some ideas about how to combine, spectacle and sport and entertainment and things like that. So this really would have been just a second sort of project like this that they would have built. It was announced right around the same time as Florida. So yeah, I mean, who knows what they would have done? It would have been interesting to see if they would have gone that direction towards recreational projects, like what else they could have possibly come up with.
So full disclosure, I have also been to the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. What a great little secret find that was.
You know, isn't it great?
Oh my God, we were just driving back from Napa one day, and we literally just stumbled upon it, and
Yeah.
like, holy cow. But obviously you guys noticed something in that timeline which I have literally no memory of that ever clicking in. But my question is, you mentioned that he was doing this almost at the same time as he was secretly buying land in Orlando. So did he buy any land in California for this? And if he did, was it kind of the same way, kind of surreptitiously, or was it more out in the open?
It was actually, he was buying land for this basically at the same time. And he was also doing this basically secretly. He didn't, he was a smart businessman, which of course your listeners will appreciate. He's not trying to drive up prices and drive up demand, because if the Disney name gets out that they're interested in this, that's gonna make him pay a lot more for that. So he was buying up land in the same way he was buying the land for the Florida project. And this was a little different too, because while he was buying the area around where he was planning to build this, he had to put in a bid, actually, because it was actually public land owned by the U.S. Forest Service. So they actually had put up this land in Mineral King, California, where he was trying to build this for bid. And Disney came out ahead and ended up winning the rights to start to build this ski resort and recreation destination. So it was really a combination of those two things.
So Walt was known as an environmentalist, and I think back then it was a lot easier to get these kind of projects through all the environmental hurdles. But he did come up with some resistance against this project, right, from local environmentalists.
He did, yeah. I mean, sort of, that's sort of the crux of the book, a lot of it. And yeah, there was a lot that changed in the intervening years. Some of it was sort of directly or indirectly due to this battle, in terms of, how environmentalists reacted to projects like this. But fairly early on, the Sierra Club in particular, which was, one of the biggest environmental groups in the country and still is, this was kind of a favorite spot of theirs where he was looking to build. And it was right on the edge of Sequoia National Park. There would have had to be a new road built that would go through the park. So there were just a lot of environmental concerns that cropped up, pretty immediately when this was announced.
And ultimately it didn't get done, right? Let's kind of to the end here, but it didn't get approved. It wasn't it didn't get the project done.
Yeah, the title gives it away, but but it was a lot. That's what surprised us, is because you might read it like on the timeline or even in a history or biography of Walt that might just mention this thing, but we didn't really grasp. This went on for about 18 years. This whole fight ended up with, essentially was like an act of Congress to put this area into Sequoia National Park in 1978, and that's really how it finally ended, this whole saga.
When you think of Walt Disney, he may be the first person you give credit to the expression "go big or go home."
Yeah.
So was part of the fear that he was going to just swamp this mountain with Mickey Mouse, or was he mindful of that and was going to try to rein in the size of it? Do you have any idea what the scope of it was going to be?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think you're right on with people's fear, because they were scared of what Disney was going to do, because Disney obviously was synonymous with building this very elaborate amusement park, obviously with Disneyland, which had opened a few years prior, and of course with Mickey Mouse and the princesses and the cartoons. Obviously, it wasn't the behemoth that it is today, but it certainly was growing, and certainly this company that people were scared of what it was going to become. And that's also kind of why we titled this Disneyland on the Mountain, because that was a lot of their fears of, it was basically going to be this amusement park that was going to be in this beautiful area, but actually it wasn't. Walt Disney really tried to create something that he thought would be beneficial to the area. And he really wanted to make it accessible to people, because it really wasn't an accessible place for people to travel to and to vacation. And he wanted it to be basically a place where people could understand and be educated on nature, which was really interesting. It wasn't, yes, people could have fun there and they could go skiing, they can go sledding, they can go to a movie theater and, tons of different restaurants. And that was all going to be part of it. But it was really going to be, people could walk around the area. They could actually see, real animals rather than, a giant Mickey Mouse. They could go around the streams that was around the area and on nature walks and that kind of thing. And he was really passionate about it. And that was really a very, very interesting thing that we learned while writing this. And we're excited for readers to find out more of that side of him.
So it is maybe showing my ignorance, but Disney doesn't lose too many of these. So, this was a pretty sizable project and sounds like a big investment, both not only money, but corporate time, politically. At the end of the day, how did they come out of this?
They were at the time when this happened in 78, when this law was passed that put the park or the area into the park, the CEO at the time, Card Walker, really wrote this kind of blistering letter to Jimmy Carter saying exactly what you just said. Like, we've put so much time, so much money in planning this. We put kind of our good reputation on the line. And, they just, it was such a long battle. It unfolded so slowly that I think by the time, it sort of almost ended with a whimper in a way. So I think it was not like, I think they kind of kept paying lip service to, we're going to do this for Walt, we're going to build this. But I think maybe internally at that point, they had kind of lost hope that it was really going to happen. They looked at another location at one point, also in California also. But, they definitely learned some lessons along the way. But it was, there's a short list of kind of failed Disney projects, but this was one that really lasted quite a while and cost them, like you said, quite a bit of time and money.
And what's really interesting is like Greg just said, is that Card Walker and a lot of the Disney company they really didn't like having their name dragged, right? Because they're Disney and they really stood up for themselves. And so anytime that anyone who opposed the project really were attacking them, they fought right back, which was pretty phenomenal to see and research.
So by 1978, I believe, I don't know if Epcot was open, but it was being built, or it was definitely on the drawing board. At that point, did they also have their sights set on China and France and all these other world projects? Or asked differently, do you think they would have done the expansion they did around the world if they were successful in building Disney on the Mountain?
What a great question. I feel like I'm sure they would have. Because I think it would have given them even more leverage, and to say, hey, we've done, look at all of what we've created and how popular it was. Because undoubtedly it's Disney. It would have been extremely popular. It was going to really, I think, change skiing and recreation and a lot of what people see. Look at Vail Resorts. We're in Colorado. Look at something like that. It's just such this booming business. It would have done that for California. It would have done that for Disney. So I think it would have given them even more leverage to develop other properties. But at that time, yes, I think they were starting to develop Epcot. I can't remember if it was starting to be built at the end of it would have started to be built at the end of the 1970s, and then they were starting to look at some of those international properties at that time too. I think that was a little ways off, but I'm sure that was starting to be in their thought process.
So Greg and Kathryn, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we have so many more questions about Walt the man and what you've learned just during research of the book.
Sounds good.
So we'll be right back with Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominick Tavella, and our guests this evening, Greg Glasgow and Kathryn Mayer, authors of Disneyland on the Mountain, Walt, the Environmentalists, and the Ski Resort That Never Was. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've read a lot about Walt Disney, and we were just talking about how determined he was in his life and really a visionary. He died even before Disney World opened up. Do you think had he lived, this project would have gotten done?
We certainly wonder that. We've asked ourselves that many, many times, just because it was such a big occasion when he passed away. It was pretty sudden when it happened. It shocked people inside the company, obviously the world. And this was only really a year after he had won the rights to build this thing. And so, yes, there was a little bit of opposition that was starting to crop up, but it certainly reached a big fever pitch after he passed away. So we do kind of think that they, might have lost their way a little bit in terms of when Walt passed away, because he was really the one who guided this. This was extremely, he wanted this probably more than, we could argue that he wanted this more than most things that he actually wanted, because this was really something he felt passionate about. He considered himself to be a conservationist. He had created a series of wildlife documentaries for several years. And this was something he really wanted to create. He wanted to bring people to the mountains. He wanted to educate people about this. And so we think that if he had lived, that things might have been different, because people, actually a lot of environmentalists at the time who then opposed this project, they actually grew up with a lot of these Walt Disney wildlife films. And when he created them, that actually inspired them for a lot of their beliefs. And of course, Walt was a genius in many ways, and he was also a gregarious, very interesting guy, very charismatic. People really liked him. So we do think that he probably could have tapered some of those fears and worked and compromised in a way that maybe they couldn't have quite accomplished after he passed away.
So I lost track of the timeline. I know he died of lung cancer, and I know he died relatively quickly, but so when he started this project, you don't think he knew he was as sick as he was at the time?
Yeah, I think, he died just a year later, a year after they sort of won this bid, as Kathryn said.
Right.
I think he knew something was going on, but I don't think he realized it was as bad as,
Okay.
certainly, within a year later, I think he had a much better idea. But back when this was first announced, I think, he thought the future was bright. He made a few comments, even in 1966, about his legacy and sort of, I want to make sure I leave this in the hands of the people that'll do it. But I don't think anybody at the time read into that enough to know exactly, what he was thinking.
When I saw the headline of the book, I really almost kind of smiled to myself, because you think of what Disney's going through right now in Florida, and I think most people would argue they've been good citizens in the state.
Yeah.
Yet the political environment has them very much at odds with the current administration there. And I'm not making a call of who's right or who's wrong, but you would think that they would have had strong political support for this kind of a project in California. So again, kind of what happened? Did they have support? Did it wane at some point? Did they line their ducks up to get it done, or just he never had a chance to actually do that?
You're kind of right on all accounts, basically. So they did have political support from the get-go, because the US government actually had to be involved in developing this specific area as well. Like we mentioned a little bit earlier, just because it was this public land. So the US government actually had to put this out for bid. So the government had to be supportive, at least at the beginning. Yes, Walt Disney actually wanted specifically this area. He had seen this even before it was up for bid, but it wasn't like he just willy-nilly picked it, you know? So, but it was interesting because at the beginning, Governor Pat Brown was the governor of California at the time, and he was very in favor of this because if you're, you know, to be smart for the state economy, I mean, this is going to be a huge boon for them, right? I mean, this is going to bring millions of dollars to the state. It's going to bring tons of different tourists. This is at a time when, in the 60s, when, you know, people were starting to travel more and fly more and spend more of their dollars on vacation.
You would think the job creation, tax
The
revenue.
job creation, exactly. Yeah, this was great for them. So from a political sense, you know, the support was all in at the beginning, but we're talking also about the 1960s, 1970s. Some of those winds started to change a little bit in the sense where we're talking a little bit more about the environment. Of course, we're talking about women's rights, civil rights, all that stuff is coming to the forefront. And there are some political implications of that. So there was this sense of, do we need to develop every area? And so some politicians did then join the opposition. And so it was very interesting because there were certainly people in support of it, and there were people who opposed it. And some interesting characters come to play in our book, which we're excited for people to find out about, from President Jimmy Carter to, of course, Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California at one time during this long battle as well. So
I remember as a kid in the early 70s, the first Earth Day. So you're right, the tide had changed at that point. You know, as you were speaking, Kathryn, you know, it dawned upon me what you said about travel. How are people going to get there? Were they going to have to build an airport in the middle of a mountain? I could see, you know, a lot of people potentially being opposed to that. So what was the logistics? What was the closest airport? What was the plan to getting people actually to this resort?
I think they were really they were looking mostly at this being skiers in California. And one of the beauties of this area, Mineral King, was that it was equidistant from LA and San Francisco. So probably like 2 to 3 hour drive from either place. So they really thought they could attract a lot of skiers kind of from those, you know, big metropolitan areas. And at the beginning, they were looking at, even when the Forest Service put this area up for bid, as Kathryn said, one of the stipulations was whoever wins the right to develop this area, you have to be able to improve the current road and basically turn it into a highway that's going to bring in this big amount of traffic, because the existing road was really primitive. It was, you know, tons of switchbacks, not paved at some point. But then, you know, later on, when the environmental fight intensified, they started looking at things like maybe a railway, like a cog railway that people could park a little farther down from the valley and then take a train like into the area that would be less of environmental impact. So they tried a few kind of different ideas. At one point, they're even looking at like an electric bus that may have like taken people up instead. So I mean, they tried a number of things. And one of the other things to mention about this area is that they didn't want any cars there. They were going to have a car-free resort. All the parking would have happened kind of right at the edge in an underground lot. And then they would have been sort of conveyed up to where the rest of it was. So, I mean, they looked at a lot of transportation options, but that was really, you know, part of the puzzle.
Crazy question. Was the tram in Disney World, was that possibly an offshoot of what they were trying to do in the resort, or is there no connection?
They looked at, it's funny that you say that, because that Walt was interested in like a lot of this futuristic city planning type stuff, as you see with like Epcot, especially kind of his initial idea. And he was interested in the monorail idea. And they looked at, that was sort of the very first way that these environmentalists got wind of this, is these rumors in the Mineral King area that Walt Disney is doing studies to put a monorail track in that's going to go from, you know, the main road like up into this valley. And that's what got people curious. But I think they abandoned that pretty quickly because it's just like the sort of the structures that would have had to been built to support the track and things like that. But there was, if you're familiar with the People Mover at all in Walt Disney World, there was kind of a version of that they were looking at that would have actually taken people from that parking garage up into the rest of the resort. So some of those other options that sort of made an appearance.
So yeah, a lot of different tie-ins, which is interesting, you know, when we think of something that happened obviously a long time ago, but
Yeah.
you see how it has developed and basically made its way into other Disney properties, which has been really fascinating to research and find out about.
Yeah.
So full disclosure, I obviously haven't read the book yet, but I'm going to kind of go to the end and then maybe qualify it. But what's the life lesson in this? I mean, we see it daily, weekly, where major corporations, maybe in good faith and with good motive, try to get projects done, and they just seem to always just step on their own toes or trip on their own tongues. Well, what's the lesson here for a company looking to do a project? I mean, of all the companies on the planet, this is one that should have been able to get this project done. So what's the life lesson in this experience?
Yeah, I feel like maybe one of those lessons is don't always count on everything going right. I mean, what happens at one, you know, at the very beginning, what they could count on, everything was going perfect. The US government put this up for bid. Everyone was in favor. If you read, you know, we combed through thousands of newspaper articles when we were writing this at the beginning. Everyone was so excited. You know, Disney's going to build this. People from all over California are going to come and see this new thing. People are going to start traveling, you know, all across the country to see this. They're very excited. And everything completely changed. So I mean, I think one of the big lessons for businesses is just, nothing is a guarantee, especially with, you know, what we're going to see, you know, the last several years between a pandemic and a million other things that have happened over the last several years. I mean, no one really anticipated that, right? So this is kind of in the same vein in a sense. Another thing is knowing, I think, when to continue to stand up for your beliefs and stand up for what you want to accomplish and to be vocal about what you're trying to create and why it's beneficial, and B, maybe sometimes know when to call it quits. Disney didn't call it quits on this project on their own. They actually waited until the intervention of a US president for this project, which is kind of crazy and hard to believe that's what happened. But they also, like we talked about before, they didn't, you know, they kept wanting to make this happen. And so it was actually really, really impressive to see them keep standing up for this and keep the fight alive. And I actually think that was more impressive than simply giving up.
So guys, what happened to the land? I know, you know, it went to United States Park, but did Disney sell the land back to the government? Did he donate the land back to the government? Was it seized by the government? How did that finally end?
I mean, as far as we know, they still do own some of the land up there. I think it's just sort of, you know, it's parking lots and things like that. Some of it, we're honestly not sure. Some of it probably was sold back, I would assume, because there's some pretty big tracks that were bought by them. But I mean, obviously they never got anything off the ground in terms of anything that they built, anything like that. So if you go up there now, it's going to look pretty much the same as it did in 65 when this whole thing started.
So we're not going to cry for Disney. I mean, they've been able to accomplish quite an incredible amount of projects and get them done, and I'll say almost universally loved around the world. But I like your answer. Don't count your chickens before they hatch, right? These companies go in with sometimes the best motives and sometimes really terrific brands, but they can figure out ways to screw it up. And somehow this one didn't get off the ground.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at Disney now and how they're doing as a company, which you guys, I'm sure, could talk about for all night, I'm sure. But they're kind of going through some challenges now in terms of their own performance, and kind of, obviously rumors of sales, and obviously the Iger secession mess. And so, yeah, they're kind of finding their way again right now. So,
Yeah, and not to say, as Don mentioned earlier, fighting with the governor
yeah,
for whatever reason. And that's what's really interesting, is the governor now seems to want to, give it a big never mind. And Disney's like, nope, now we're in this thing,
yeah,
and we're going to see it through, which, to your point earlier, sounds very Disney-esque, right? It's their name, it's their reputation.
yeah.
And you want to have a fight? You want to fight with Mickey Mouse? Let's
Let's
do
fight.
it.
Exactly. I know. I love it. I love to hear it. That's exactly, it's so funny because when we were writing this, and obviously it's now out in the world, and people kind of asked us a little bit, like, is there kind of, this is so interesting about Florida. Is there any kind of tie-in, or on the flip side saying, we've never seen anything like this. This is unprecedented. And we kind of look at each other and think, it's actually happened before, in a way. So it's been really, really fascinating to see that, because we're seeing a lot of those similarities for sure.
Kathryn, which is why I keep coming back to this theme that, companies need to kind of live and breathe in the world, and they need to be good neighbors. And part of that is being smart politically. And I'm not going to get into the whole Florida governor argument, except that, it creates this very negative karma scenario that you might end up cutting off your nose to spite your face. So companies got to be very sensitive to their brand and how they're dealing both politically and environmentally and the local community. Getting a project of this magnitude off the ground is not easy to start with, and clearly is difficult. Becomes more difficult as you go down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you messing with the mouse hasn't really done any favors politically for that governor, as we see in the current race. So, a lot, and like you said, I mean, a lot of it was them trying to be good citizens in Florida. And we even talk about the invention of like the Reedy Creek District in our book, where, they kind of said, we don't want to put the burden of emergency services and these different things on the state, so we'll do it ourselves. And then somehow that got twisted into, they have this like little special kingdom that they're trying to preserve. So, you have to be careful. And Disney's always they're always a couple steps ahead at DC. So you got to be careful.
And they're beloved, right? I mean, even now when things get complicated with them, and yes, there's certainly, I think, nowadays some people who kind of roll their eyes at the Disney name and what they've done, and Disney, Disney-ification of culture in a lot of ways, but still they're very beloved, right? So they continue to be in many areas of the globe, and I think that's kind of makes them a unicorn in a sense.
So I was there, full disclosure, with my family in May. We took our two little granddaughters there. Dominick rolled his eyes, thought I was out of my mind, but we were there. It was packed, right? You had to make your dinner reservations weeks in advance. When we took our oldest granddaughter to the light parade in front of the castle, when it was ended, you just got lifted out. I mean, it was mobbed. It was wall to wall. And then you turn on certain news bubbles and they're too woke and they're too this and no one's going to go. And it is very expensive.
No, exactly. Right? It is. It's
packed.
Yeah.
It's mobbed. So I still think there's this disconnect between the discourse on the news, and people just want to go there and forget about all of that in this fantasy land.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they have a brand that's very in sync in a sense with, like, all these troubled times that we're going through. I mean, maybe people just want an escape like that, and you see that when you go to the parks. I mean, they're crazy. People don't really seem to mind the prices, however high they make them. I mean, the demand continues and continues.
which makes
But
it,
it speaks to this disconnect, right, between that corporate mentality. They're just trying to get projects done, and there's a family, even if it's Mike's family, that just wants to go there and have a good time, right? They don't want to get involved in the politics, but companies need to be very brand aware in how that brand plays out in a public forum.
And
And
I
it can
think,
implode.
I think them standing up for themselves in that situation made them more attractive to a certain demographic that's, I think, going there more almost in a sort of a supportive way. I mean, I think they saw their theme park, especially in Florida, revenues really went up after all that drama happened.
And just getting back to what you guys said before, when people were asking you if there's, a connection between, the fight and how it played out, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it safe to assume that you guys were not surprised when Disney dug in and said, bring it on?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of people were shocked. But I don't think either of us were shocked that this is still going on. And like you said earlier, when DeSantis is kind of like, let's kind of forget about this, never mind. And Disney's like, nope. I love it. I think it's personally, I think it's quite entertaining, but
Maybe the basis for another book.
yeah, exactly.
Honestly,
right.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, we thought that this would have been figured out by now. And how long has this been going on for? So, I mean, this continues to play out. So pretty crazy.
One last question, and then we want to talk about how, we could actually get your book and how our listeners could get it. When Walt passed away, I think his brother took over the company, and then Roy, I think, was his son. What was the family on board to finish this project? Were they enthusiastic about it as Walt was?
Yes and no, and that's a great question. So his brother was Roy, and then Roy had his son also named Roy.
Right, Roy Jr.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So just to confuse everything a little bit.
Right.
But Roy took over, his older brother took over after Walt passed away, and he did so kind of reluctantly because he liked being behind the scenes. He was a brilliant businessman. Roy, even more so than Walt in some ways, Walt was definitely the creative. Roy made all those things happen. He financed all of Walt's projects, figured out all that behind the scenes. So he didn't want to be the face of the company, but he basically had to do that to make sure everything went according to plan. And so what we had found out in our research was that actually Roy had said to a couple of folks, we're in the movie business, we're in the amusement park business, we're not in the ski business. I don't really understand why Walt wanted to do this. So he didn't say this publicly, but he would say this to other Disney employees. And we found out about that when we were writing this, which was really interesting. However, the day after Walt passed away, Roy basically put out a press release. He did so company-wide, but also a press release basically to the world saying, I'm going to continue making what Walt wanted to happen. And those two things are the Florida project, and they are this Mineral Cane ski resort. So even though he didn't really see it, and a lot of people in the Disney company didn't quite see his vision because they weren't personally as invested in it as Walt, they wanted to make it happen for him. And I think that was something pretty cool to see too, because, Walt's always really continues to be to this day, the face of the Disney company. And so that was really fascinating to find out about.
So guys, we have about a minute. Congratulations on writing a really interesting story and making it interesting, right? Because, it could be a dull topic, but you guys made it really fascinating. I enjoyed reading it. And how do our listeners get their hands on it?
Well, thanks so much for the kind words about the book. We appreciate them a lot. The book is available on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, pretty much anywhere online you get books, and your local bookstore could probably order it for you as well. We can also go to our website, DisneylandOnTheMountain.com, and there's links there to buy the book and learn more about us. And you could actually send us a message through the site. So we'd love to hear from anybody who reads it or not, and just kind of hear their take on how this all went down.
Dom,
Well,
any
I'm
closing
looking forward to
comments?
reading it, Mike. It sounds like a pretty fascinating story and timely given what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, I think you know what? I think Dom's onto something. I think you got another book in you with this Florida story, and hopefully Dom gets a credit in the beginning when you
Yeah,
write
I
that
think
book.
so.
Make it on page 83 towards the bottom. And that'll be fine.
We're going to be dedicating it to you. That's going to be, that's
Now
it.
you're really,
The idea.
yeah, you're really going out on a limb there, but that's okay.
Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate the time tonight, and we thank you for setting aside a few minutes for us.
Oh, absolutely. This was a blast. Thank you
Thank
both
you, guys.
so much.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. All right, we are out of time, and Dominic and I will be back next week with a new edition of the Lebenthal Report. Have a good night, everybody.